Hello. So today we're going to be starting our final unit, which is organic chemistry. So we've all heard the word organic before. Normally I start class with this lesson talking about where we've seen or heard or what we think the word organic means, because in our day-to-day lives it has a very different meaning than what it does in chemistry. Organic in the store means that our foods haven't been treated with synthetic, meaning like made in a factory, or made of chemicals, synthetic fertilizers or synthetic pesticides to keep the bugs off, right? There are very strict certain parameters that the companies that certify as organic want you to maintain or stand by in order to make sure your food isn't altered in any way or isn't exposed to certain chemical residues that they think could be dangerous. So organic food, right, tends to have some sort of label on it, tends to be a little more expensive because it's not as easy to produce, and it has to do with what is used to treat those crops. However, organic chemistry is different. Organic chemistry has to do with the molecules that make up a substance. So, organic chemistry is, in short, the study of carbon hydrogen based molecules, like you see here. This is methane, CH4, and it is an organic molecule. So, any molecule that has carbon bonded to hydrogen is deemed organic. It's that simple. If we have, like we see here, carbons with hydrogens directly attached to it, that is deemed an organic molecule. That's the simplest definition that we have. So let's see if we can identify organic molecules. Here we have carbon dioxide. We have carbon, right? That's important. It's bonded to two oxygens. Carbon dioxide's all over the place. Us as living things, we breathe it in or can breathe it out too, right? Because there's lots of carbon dioxide in the air already. So carbon dioxide, you'd think it has to do with living things, right? That's organic, it has carbon in it, whereas it is not actually organic because there's no hydrogen bonded to our carbon here. C3H8, this is propane. We've all used propane before in our stoves and our barbecues outside. We have carbons and they are bonded to hydrogens. That is an organic molecule. HCl, we have hydrogen bonded to chlorine, and you do see a C here, but that C is not for carbon, right? That's part of chlorine. So it's hydrogen bonded to chlorine, there's no carbon involved, so hydrochloric acid would not be an organic molecule. So why carbon? What makes carbon important? Carbon is so important to these molecules because it has 4 valence electrons and none of them are paired up, meaning it has 4 bonding sites, right? If you think back to our Lewis structures from way back when we drew in the valence electrons around our element symbol, when they were not paired up, they were bonding sites, and those are places where you can form covalent bonds. And carbon has the most you can possibly have, which is 4. So the high number of bonding sites equates to a high number of potential bonds that can be made, right? If you only have one bonding site, there's only so many things you can do. But as you add more and more, up to 4 bonding sites like with carbon, there are many more different permutations or versions of bonds that you can make with neighboring atoms and molecules. So organic molecules have what we call a carbon backbone, which means that there's lots of carbons all chained together with covalent bonds. Most of the time they're single, but they can go up to double and triple bonds as well. And because of this, we get these really long chains that create huge molecules, way bigger than anything we've dealt with so far. And organic molecules, while they can be really small, like the methane we saw on the previous slide, they can also be and tend to be very, very large. So it's not just carbon and hydrogen. They also tend to have oxygen, nitrogen, sometimes phosphorus and sulfur too. I know Ms. DeWitt in your ag class taught you about the common atoms in certain organic or molecules in our bodies. And these are what we see in our large organic molecules. This here, right, you'll see it has carbons, oxygens, hydrogens, and nitrogens. This is caffeine. This is what's in our coffee and our tea, which is an organic molecule. So Where do we see organic molecules? And the answer is all over the place, right? Our body is made up of organic molecules. Every living thing is made up of organic molecules. That's because we are made up of fats, right? Or lipids, which is a broader term. And you can see this is just a generic equation or molecule for a fat or lipid. They can get up to, 50 and even more carbons and 100 plus hydrogens and oxygens. These are really, really large single molecules here. Carbohydrates, they have carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens here. An example of this, right, the simplest one is glucose or sugars, which we eat all the time. Glucose is C6H12O6. We use this in our body. Plants use it as well to store energy. This is a hydrocarbon. Proteins, right, they have these amine groups here, but these are also organic molecules. And our DNA, what makes us us, diribonucleic acid, is a hydrocarbon as well. There's really long carbon backbones in that double helix structure that are holding our DNA together using these large organic molecules. So drawing organic molecules can be done several ways, and because it can be very, very large, but also very, very repetitive, there's some sort of shortcuts that can be used as well. So I recorded myself drawing out butane, which is C4H10, 3 different ways, and I'll talk you through those right now. So we'll learn all about the different naming, right? Eventually, after next week, hopefully, you'll be able to tell me that butane is C4H10. We'll talk about naming really soon. But the first way, and how I always like to start, is just by drawing out the carbon backbone, we call it, right? So we have 4 carbons, right? So we just draw carbon, a single covalent bond, carbon, a single covalent bond, holding all of these together. We have 4, we know from the molecular formula here, we just draw those 4 out with single bonds in between them. Then remember, one of the important things why carbon's so important is that it can form 4 bonds, right? So those other bonds are going to be filled up with the hydrogens that are remaining. So our carbons on the end, they only have 1 bond being used, meaning of the 4, they've used up 1, so they have 3 remaining, right? Meaning we're going to attach 3 hydrogens on the end, whereas the ones in the middle, like this carbon here, out of the 4 bonds that it can form, it's already formed 1, 2. So out of the 4, it's formed 2, meaning it has 2 left, and we will put the 2 hydrogens on either side. And there you go. That would be the simplest way to draw out butane, right? We have our 4 carbons making up the sort of backbone of our molecule, and then it is what we call saturated, and we'll define that later, but essentially completely full. All the other bonds are filled up with the remaining hydrogens. And if you count them out, we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hydrogens here in order to make sure that each of these carbons has all 4 bonds completely filled. So this is just a nice straight line, which is an easy way to draw it. However, if you think back to when we were talking about our Vesper models and we had the balloons and the different shapes, right? We didn't have, if we had an atom, a central atom that had 4 atoms attached to it, it didn't form a straight line, right? What it did was it formed these tetrahedral shapes, was the name of it. And so a more accurate way of drawing them out is very similar to this, except it's not actually a straight line. Instead, each carbon has a sort of tetrahedral shape to it. And it ends up giving us this zigzag pattern here. So again, 4 carbons, right? Except instead of all being straight, you sort of alternate up and down, making a zigzag here. And then the hydrogens, you still stick in the same amount, but instead, they want to be as far apart from each other as they can, right? So we make these sort of tetrahedral looking shapes with each carbon. And this is a more real to life representation of the shapes that organic molecules have. So butane is short, right? It's only 4 carbons. And while this is a total of 14 atoms, you might think, wow, that's a lot. This is actually really small when it comes to organic molecules. So because, like I showed you before, we can get up to, dozens, if not hundreds of different carbons, we have a shorthand that I will show you here that saves you some time. There you go. It's that simple, right? So you've seen in the molecules of the week, sometimes I have just, it looks like little zigzag lines coming off of molecules. And that's because this is this shorthand here, where we have each point. So right here, right here, right here, right here, we have 4 points. Each one represents a carbon, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It mirrors the second example up here in its shape. And then we assume each of these lines has a bond. We assume that the carbon is filled up with hydrogens to make it 4 bonds in total. So this carbon here only has 1 bond, so we assume it has the 3 hydrogens. This one here has 1, 2 bonds, so we assume it has 2 more hydrogens to fill up the 4 total bonds it needs. Same here, this one would have 2, and this one would have 3. We just don't have to draw it, because otherwise you could spend, an hour drawing in hundreds of hydrogens if you didn't understand that it was completely full. So those are the 3 different ways to draw hydrocarbons. We will have plenty of examples and problems moving forward. The homework for this unit, I know a lot of what we've done has been like you just type it into the Google Doc and submit it that way. I would recommend, if possible, to write these out, to actually draw them out by hand, take a picture, and submit them to Google Classroom. And then it'll be a lot easier for you and a lot easier for me to figure out what's going on.